Good afternoon, CFC. I'm excited to be sitting here right here in the Worship Center with Pastor Mike Haynes. Many of you know him. He is our pastor of student ministries. He does that also with Brooke Ackerman. But if you've been a part of our church for a period of time at all, you've probably had the privilege of, if you have kids, teenagers, sitting under Mike's teaching, but also from time to time, you've taught here, or not from here, because back in the old building, we haven't really done anything from here yet, right? From the platform in that way. And so what a lot of people don't know or realize is that we had all kinds of plans of what we were going to introduce and do and that sort of stuff before the whole COVID-19 thing happened. And one such plan that we had was we were going to announce to the church that you, instead of just teaching every once in a while, are going to become permanently a part of our teaching team. So I guess this is the way we are going to announce it, right? So
it's great to be here and part of the teaching team. Yeah.
Welcome to the team, right?
Been sitting on that for a while.
Sitting there for, now it's public. Yeah. But anyway, so nothing in life right now is working out how we thought. Now, one of the things that I'm really excited about is the aspects of what you're going to bring as a person to how you apply it to Scripture and how it applies to life. Now, we joke about this all the time. I know I don't look this, but I'm technically... when my parents were my age, I was Mike's age. So I feel a little old right now that we have different experiences. You're from a different generation. I'm from like early to mid Generation X. You're millennial in that way. And you know, you have that sort of different experience. Also, not missing on anyone who has eyes. You know, I am white. You are not white.
That's true.
Last time we checked, right?
That's true.
And as we look at what, once again, has sort of come into the national conscience, it's never gone away, with the murder of George Floyd and now just what happened in Atlanta and so many, the list goes on and on and on. I'm so excited specifically that you're going to continue preaching Scripture, but also as God has taught you through life experiences, how that applies in so many other ways. And so for someone who may not know you personally, right? They know you as the youth pastor, or they know you as someone they've seen from time to time up on the platform. Would you just kind of share with people as we get to know you a little bit what's been your experience specifically growing up black in America, which we know is a different experience than, say, if you grow up like me, right?
Yeah, and the funny thing about that is that it's not only a different experience for me growing up black in America from you, but it's also a different experience me growing up black in America from other black people growing up in America, right? And so one of my particular, I don't have white privilege because I'm not white, but one of my privileges is that I have grown up in mostly upper middle class types of areas. And so that's just one of my privileges, right? And that's just something that is important for my story, and it's important that other people recognize that my story isn't everyone's story of everyone who's grown up black in America. So there are some very specific things about my story that I think it's important that we acknowledge that up front. And so if there's anyone who listens to me share my story and you go, oh, that's nothing, or like, you know, I get that. I get that my story is not your story, but it is my story, and it's the only one I've got. So I'm going to stick with it. And I'm asking you to share just some grace with me as I share my experience growing up black in America. Pause. You can get your phone. They actually zoomed in on me.
Oh, sweet.
There, so they were on it.
They were. They got it. Thank you. I dropped my phone. I think we're still going, though. So we paused. So we'll just keep moving.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Perfect. All right. So yeah, one of the things that's been unique about my story is that I am, and always have been since I was a little kid, what's called colloquially as an Oreo, right?
Okay.
That's just my experience. Are you familiar with the term?
I am, but I'm more familiar with the double stuff variety than I think you're talking about.
So good. So
but
good.
you've taught me a little bit about what an Oreo is, so I do know. I do know a little bit.
So in this particular context, I'm an Oreo, and what that means is that you are black on the outside, but you're white on the inside, right? Just like an Oreo, right? And so that's something that that I've been called an Oreo my entire life since I was a kid. In a lot of ways, that has not come across to me as racist most of the time, but it has caused, I have had to do some identity formation stuff with that of, oh, am I not black enough to belong in black culture, and I'm not white, so I don't fully belong in white culture either. And so there was some identity stuff that I had to do, but it wasn't, there was nothing overtly racist or right there. It was just kind of just this is kind of how I see you. But one of the interesting things about that is that occasionally it was very clear to me when someone said, oh, you're an Oreo, and kind of we engaged in that conversation. What they were saying was, oh, you're one of the good ones. I can relax around you because you're one of the non-threatening black people because you're white on the inside. So now I don't have to be afraid. I can relax, and that's kind of been a piece of my experience there. Yeah. So that's a part of it. Some forms of racism that I've experienced over the years as I've grown up. I know what it is to walk into a store. And I've walked in stores and watched the owner watch me walk around the store, right? I've experienced that where it's just this thing where it's assumed that because I'm black and because I'm young and because I'm a man that I'm gonna steal something. And I stole a cookie one time from CVS when I was 6. Accidentally, I put it in my pocket, forgot about it.
Yeah.
And when I got home and found the cookie in my pocket, I cried and told my dad, and we went back and paid for the cookie. But so stealing's not a thing, but I know what that is to experience that. I've experienced walking past people on the street, a woman on the street, and she kind of clutches at her purse a little bit as I'm walking past, and I just it's just those little moments, right? And at previous church that I was at, not here, previous church that I was at, I was told that no, you can't wear braids because if you wear braids, then you look like a thug, and we just don't want any part of that type of lifestyle, and we don't want to deal with the congregants at our church who are going to automatically assume and treat you as if you're a thug, even though you're a pastor on staff here.
Right.
And so just these little moments here and there, right? I've been pulled over by a cop for no reason, and then the cop asked me basically, like, are you a drug dealer? I was driving my mom's car, which is nice. It's a Jaguar. Very smooth ride. Really nice.
I've seen your mom's car. It is a nice
really
car.
Really nice. Yeah. Really nice. And I got lost, and this is before, I was actually alive before iPhones were like, a thing that everyone had.
Sure.
So
you're not that young.
I'm not, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, I'm a baby, but I'm not that young. Yeah. That's actually a point of pride for me. I can now say that, right? But because of that, right, because I didn't have I got lost and I didn't know where I was, and I was kind of in the back area somewhere, backwoods, and a cop pulled me over, and look, a young black man driving this nice car, and, hey, are you a drug dealer? What are you doing back here? Kind of a thing. And I'm like, well, I'm not a drug dealer. It's crazy, I'm studying to be a youth pastor, actually. So,
which was probably the first time he's ever heard that come back from that question.
I think it's got to be the first time he's ever thought that a suspicious potential drug dealer. It's got to be the first time that person has ever said, "I have a Bible in my backpack. Do you want me to show you?"
Yeah,
like, I'm not,
exactly.
So yeah, it's just these little moments here and there of racism that I've experienced. Nothing grand scale like what happened with George Floyd or Ahmaud Arbery or Freddie Gray or anything of that nature. But there have been these little moments where I've definitely experienced racism over the course of my life, and it's because of the color of my skin.
Yeah, and one of the things that I love about this conversation is the fact that depending upon, and if you've been in our congregation before, you know that our congregation doesn't all look like me. We're maybe not as diverse as we need to be in regards to Loudoun County, but one of our prayers is that no matter what socioeconomic background, no matter what racial makeup you have, that if you gather together on Sunday in this place, you look around and you say that this is a place that also represents the particular group that you may connect with in that way. But I know a lot of people get a chance to hear you and to see you, and with that comes a level of trust. And so that means that when you speak, that people listen, maybe differently than people. And so I would love for you to take that moment, that reality, and to talk to people about what you would want them to know. I've already heard several things myself. Your story isn't everybody's story, but it's your story. Yep. Are there something else that you would just, hey, as we're walking through this, and again, we're not walking through this like, okay, we're going to get to the end of this conversation sometime in the next few minutes or the next few years. But as we're growing together in Jesus Christ, trying to look more like how God wants us to be, what would you want us to know?
Yeah, and it's a tough question because there are so many things that we need to know, that I need to know, that I don't know yet, and I recognize that on the front end of trying to address it. But if I could contribute to the conversation, I would say first of all that racism and prejudice is not just in those big national news types of moments that we're all talking about this, right, because of what happened recently with George Floyd. But it's not just in those big moments. That racism also exists in those smaller, almost imperceptible moments that have more so happened in my life, right? And it was perceptible to me, but I bet to some of the folks who I've encountered, and I was like, that was a racist moment. I'm sure for some of them, they weren't even really aware of it. It wasn't a conscious thing for some of those types of, right, the clutching of the purse, or, right, it wasn't a conscious thing that was kind of prejudiced a little bit, because it's these small things, right? And so I think it's important for us to know that racism, the same racism that led to George Floyd's death is the same racism. It's all the same. Yeah. You might not be, you're like, oh, I'm not that racist, but like it's all comes from the same root. And so we'll talk more about that in a couple of minutes, I think, but that's the first thing that I would want people to know.
Yeah, so I'll follow up with that with what would you want people to do then? Because we're going through this series, what it means to live in unprecedented lives, and I'm not trying to plug a series, but just really clear, Jesus in Matthew chapter 5 said this, is my paraphrase, stop talking to me about what you know. You got to do something. It's not enough just to not do harm. You have to be actively doing good. You know, he said last week, as we looked at the end of Matthew chapter 5, that even the Pharisees and the tax collectors love those who love them, who do the obvious things. We got to go above and beyond that.
Yeah. So three things I would encourage people to do. The first one, and this is kind of the overarching one, is I would encourage people to see racism, all of this whole situation, from a different lens. I think that we all just kind of react when these things happen. We just react to whatever's natural to us, and we assume that our reaction is correct because it feels correct to us. But I think sometimes our perception is more broken than we think it is. And so I think that as Christians, the lens through which we should see everything is the gospel. And so when you put on a gospel lens, I think that'll lead you to do some different things. And so two lenses, before we move on to the do, if you're putting on a gospel lens, two lenses I think you should put on that kind of reflect the gospel in this area. The first one is that justice will be served. No matter what, no one ever really gets away with anything. Ever, right? And that's really important for people to understand, for us to understand, as we're reacting to all of this, because it's easy to feel like when you see injustices here on earth, and definitely racial injustices included in that, then it's easy for you to go, oh my gosh, well, justice isn't going to be carried out. He got away with it, right? They got away with it. No one ever gets away with anything, right? God either will carry out justice for every person's individual sins. He will carry out justice for that in eternity, and they will be judged someday for that and have to deal with the consequences of that, or justice was carried out for their sin 2,000 years ago on the cross. And so anyway, no one ever really gets away with anything. And if for us as believers, if we were to look at a situation, like even if the police officers involved in the George Floyd thing, if they weren't charged and they didn't have to face that, and we went, but they were believers, right? And so you go, oh, well, justice for their sin was carried out 2,000 years ago. If you can't handle that as a believer, if you still feel like that's no fair, that's no, right? And you're just like, oh, that doesn't count, right? Then I think we have to do some heart management as believers, because if it doesn't count, if Jesus' work on the cross isn't good enough to count for covering their sin and for carrying out justice on their sin, then who's to say it? You know what I mean? So I think we have to do some heart management there. And then the second thing is this idea of reconciliation, and that's that God highly valued justice in sending Jesus to die. Jesus had to die. Someone had to pay the penalty for sin. Justice had to be served. But at the same time, he placed an extremely high value on reconciliation as well. And so I think for those of us who are trying to figure out what to do and how to respond and how to fix it in our anger, which is good, we should be angry. I think sometimes we might overstep and forget that this isn't about revenge. It's about justice, but it's also about reconciliation. And so I think that'll lead us to do a couple of different things, and to not do a couple of different things too, which we may get to in a second. One of the things that I think we should also do is I think we should all of us need to allow Jesus into the spaces of our heart where the tiny seeds of racism would exist if there was any racism there. And I'm not saying that there is. For anyone who's watching, anyone who's listening, I know there's no way that there's anything there. I get that. There's no way that there's any racism there. It's nothing there, I'm sure. But just in case, those spaces of our heart where racism could or would exist, if it did exist, I think it's important that we allow Jesus into those spaces. I'm not going to get into specifics. I don't want to step on any particular toes with that because I don't want to get in trouble or get you in trouble. But I do think that for those of us who are dogmatically sure about certain things in our culture and about certain ways that we react to racism and certain things that we're angry about when there's protests and there's deaths of people and we get mad about, I just think we can all take a step back and allow Jesus into those spaces because that's what it means to be a Christian. Even if you're sure that you're right, just let Jesus in anyway.
Yeah.
And, just to make sure.
And I think any of us who at some point or another have been really, really confident that there's nothing there, the follow-up is, well, what's there to be afraid of, and just open the door, right? And when I find my own life, whether it's prejudice, and even in these last several weeks, I've just realized how a view I might have begins to dictate a thought process a lot earlier than I thought it should.
Yep.
And it's based on completely wrong things.
Yep.
That when we let Jesus in, he's going to do it, and he's going to do it in love, and he's going to make us better people. So I love that. Let him in looking there. Some other things you say we should do, or maybe don't do. Maybe go there.
I mean, I think definitely one thing that we should definitely not. Well, I think first of all, yes, absolutely, do the hard work of allowing Jesus into those spaces, allowing the Holy Spirit in those spaces. One more thing I think we should do is I think we should get involved. I think at some level, I'm not going to push passion on anybody for passion for this, and you have to go do something and drop everything you're doing. But I do think there's some really easy ways to inspire change, and there's petitions, there's protests that are happening around. And so I think in as much as you feel like that's something God is calling you to do, I do think this is an important issue. I think we should get involved. The online petitions that you can sign, very easy, very, very easy to sign them. I mean, so I think that's important. And the other thing I think we should do is we should listen to people who don't look like us. I think that's for me, for all, just listen to people who don't look like you. Just listen to their story. Just actively listen, and just to see what their experience has been. And maybe there's nothing for you to do with that, but I think this is a good reminder that not everybody's experience in America has been the same as your experience. And so it's always helpful to just walk a mile in someone else's shoes.
Yeah, I love that. It's a good reminder. James, right? James says, be quick to listen, slow to speak.
Right.
And we've kind of gotten that really backwards, especially in social media,
yes.
right? Let's be a keyboard warrior, and everyone needs to know exactly,
Absolutely.
in the attempt to find out where people come from. Any other things I would say don't do?
It's funny you mentioned social media because it's right there.
Yeah.
I think the number one thing I would say we need to stop doing is we need to stop unfollowing and unfriending everybody who doesn't agree with us surrounding this issue. I understand the passion, I get the anger, I understand it, but just because that person doesn't agree with you on this issue, that doesn't mean they can't be your friend anymore. And here's why I say that. The reason that I say that is because, again, justice, reconciliation, that we pursue both with equal amounts of passion. That's what it means to live out the gospel. And so, yes, you want to see justice, but a heart of reconciliation means that you're not going to draw a whole lot of lines in the sand. There are very few hard lines in the sand that you're going to draw as a friend over particular issues just because someone disagrees with you. I think that's what it means. We don't write people off really quickly because God our Father was slow to write us off. And so we don't write other people off immediately. We're willing to stay in there, to not draw hard lines in the sand, and to not make everything into an argument, a fight, a dog fight just because we don't agree. I think reconciliation, yes, and justice, yes, both.
That's where you were talking just reminded me, just Jesus' 12 disciples on this earth, right?
Yeah.
He had Matthew the tax collector and Simon the zealot, and then he had some fishermen, right? Those are three groups of people that would draw definitely different lines, right? And all of a sudden, I can't be a disciple with you. I'm sorry. Your view on taxation and how it should be collected is different than mine, right? Yeah. It's a great example.
Yeah.
Well, Mike, thanks for this. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope that you've stayed all the way through. I'm excited how God's going to use you. You're going to be teaching 4th of July weekend. So there you go. We're in a new series starting this Sunday called One. I think you'll get the purpose of it when we dive into it. But this has been great, man. I'm glad that people got to know you a little bit like I get to know you. And later on, if you ever really want to feel old, start making 1980s references around Mike and just have him look at me like... I have no clue what you're talking about.
I don't know.
Anyway, well, hey, thanks for tuning in today, Mike. Thanks for your heart.
Yeah.
And may we continue to be people of Micah chapter 6, verse 8. It says, you've shown your man what's good, and what does God require of you? To do or seek justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with our God.